Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and we have another playoff-filled episode today. Things are really starting to heat up and get further into the playoffs as we inch closer and closer to the World Series. Hope everyone had a nice weekend and was able to enjoy their Saturdays and Sundays. I know I had mentioned on Saturday I had a friend of mine come into town, and he's still here, but when this comes out on Tuesday, it would be the day before he leaves. So I'm definitely enjoying the time with him this weekend. It'll be a nice time. He actually has a birthday on Saturday, October 17th, so happy birthday to him. Today is another playoff-packed episode, like I mentioned, and so I want to dive into it. And I'll first get into my usual recap of the ALCS. I'll jump into games 4, 5, and 6, and I'll mention the player performers from those matchups and some other interesting facts about this series that's been incredible to watch. I mean, a lot of fun to watch for sure. I'll jump out of the ALCS into the NLCS for segment 2, sharing a breakdown from games 3 through 5, and also mention anything and everything in this series because the Dodgers had a huge answer after the first 2 games. I'll get into all of that in a little bit. Going into the third segment, I'll mention the most surprising things that I think have gone on in these playoffs so far and which teams and players have far exceeded my expectations. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show as I'll discuss the greatest comebacks in World Series history and which series had the best come-from-behind victory, whether in a game or in the series. I'll choose from either one, so make sure you stay around for that last segment. But getting into the first segment right now with the recap of the ALCS, I'm going to dive into it. Game 4 was a really, really close one, down to the wire one actually. And it unfortunately did not go in favor of the Rays, but I'll get into the little recap right now. In Game 4 of that ALCS matchup, Houston struck first as they were able to score the first run of the game in the bottom of the first. Both teams were scoreless after in the second inning, and then the bottom of the third inning, Houston put on another run. Tampa was able to respond by putting 2 in the top of the fourth, but then Houston followed up with 2 more runs in the bottom of the fifth. So it was scoreless through the 6th, 7th, and 8th innings, and we're heading into the 9th inning, and we've got a really close one. It's a 4-2 ball game. Tampa Bay is down, and again, at that point, they had a 3-0 lead, and Tampa did strike a little bit towards the end of the game, scored a run in the top of the 9th, but it was unfortunately not enough as the Astros were able to win 4-3 to get their first win of the series. And I know earlier in the playoffs I had mentioned how disappointed I was in them and how I didn't see them going far. That's the Astros. Well, I know now, and I was way wrong, but this series has not seemed to be their brightest moment in the playoffs. But they finally got things going in Game 4. I mean, through the first 3 games, I think we definitely all thought, hey, this is it. The Astros are done. They are finished. But then all of a sudden, Game 4 came around, and that was kind of the first, glimmer of hope that they really had. Houston really benefited from the pitching from Zach Greinke, who was lights out and was able to get out of a bases-loaded jam in the 6th inning. He really locked down those 2 straight batters going against Arozarena and Mike Brosu, 2 very imposing hitters on this team. And Arozarena, I know I'm going to continue to mention him more and more on this show, but he has been unbelievable. He's really been the anchor for their hitting, and their hitting has not been spectacular by any means all year long, but he has really become kind of the forefront of that really good hitting that they can have. I mean, they can have great hitting when it does, present itself, if you will. But, Manuel Margot, another guy that's been hitting much better in the playoffs, and then also Ji-Man Choi, he's been doing a little bit better. Mike Brosu has come up huge for them. Willie Adames has been great in the field. Kevin Kiermaier, they've been getting a lot of help from a lot of different guys. But Arozarena for the Rays continues to dazzle. He's been on a streak these playoffs like I've never seen before. He has been beyond on a roll. He's on a tear without a doubt. But their offense, again, continues to be very limited at times. Although they did collect 7 total hits, they were only scoring scoring runs in the 4th and the 9th innings, and 2 of those 3 runs came off of a homer by Arozarena. Other than that, there was virtually no extra base hits at all for this team, and that is showing the struggle that they have to bring in large amounts of runs in games. They can't really have those bursts of 4 or 5 run, half innings. They can't have a 6-run bottom 6 inning. They don't have that capability. At least they're not showing it. That is the issue that is starting to catch up to Tampa for sure, and Houston has been hot the whole time, and it continued. I mean, George Springer got involved a lot more offensively from the plate in Game 4. Altuve has been constantly collecting hits every game in this series. This was actually Altuve's 2nd straight game with at least 2 hits. So clearly he's been doing well, hitting much better than he was in the season. Glasnow didn't pitch great for the Rays, which you always hate to lose to that opportunity to try and take a game with a potential ace on the mound and not be able to get a win. That is definitely a big-time lost opportunity, but it happens. Well, and he went 6 innings. He allowed 8 hits, 4 earned runs, and 5 Ks. So not typical Glasnow numbers, very different from his outing of 10 Ks, which was very impressive. So this is, a huge win for the Astros, and they definitely needed it without a doubt. And now they are keeping things interesting, as we will hear what all happened in Game 5 in a moment. Now, getting into my top performers from Game 4. Randy Arozarena, no question about it. I mean, you have to put him in there. He was 1 for 4, 2 RBIs, 1 homer. Austin Meadows, he was also 2 for 4. He had a good day from the plate. George Springer, 3 for 4 with 2 RBIs, and Jose Altuve, 2 for 4 with 2 RBIs. Some really great hitting from the Astros. I mean, you can tell that the first 3 games, I think they were trying to figure things out, and then recently, the last 3 games, they've really started to pick things up. And, I mean, this Game 7 is going to be very interesting. And, again, I'm recording this on October 17th, so we will all find out on this day of recording when these games, or, who's going to be moving on to the World Series after today. So once this episode comes out on Tuesday, you all will know who's going to be in the World Series most likely. But it's going to be an interesting, scenario that will be played out here in a couple hours. Now, getting into Game 5, another very, very close one that virtually ended in the same exact way. Rays versus Astros in Game 5. I'll get into it. In the first inning, again, Houston striking first, being able to score the first run in the bottom of the first inning. No runs were scored in the second, and then Tampa answered with a run in the top of the third, but then Houston followed up with 2 runs in the bottom of the third. So now it's 3-1 going into the 4th inning, scoreless in the 4th inning for both teams. Tampa did tack on another run in the top of the 5th, so now it's 3-2. They're inching a little bit closer, and then Tampa wound up actually tying the game in the top of the 8th, having some very clutch hitting there, and it went 3-3 going into the top of the 9th. No score was registered by the Rays, and then going into the bottom half of the 9th inning, that is where Carlos Correa, he stepped up, hit his walk-off home run, and let me tell you what, he got all of that ball and more. I mean, he let that thing fly. And again, once again, the Astros won 4-3, so very identical game from the night before, and they were able to add on another win in the series to cut down the deficit from 3-1 to 3-2 now. And both teams, I mean, they were at it again, playing strategic ball and being very meticulous and calculated with each move. This was an interesting game, as it was the first game to ever end in the playoffs where the game was led off with a homer and was walked off with a homer. And Springer continues to be incredible. I mean, he was the one leading it off, kicking things off with a big homer in the first inning. And Springer's been batting .286 with 4 homers in the playoffs. And really all 4 of those homers coming from the ALDS on. And it's a clear sign he woke up when he needed to, since he didn't have a typical Springer year, as he only batted .265 this season. So again, couple points different, but again, he's been able, in recent games and in recent series, he's really packed in the offense really nicely. Altuve is another guy who has completely flipped the script on this season, with going from a .219 average to batting a whopping .341 in the playoffs. So that's over an 100-point difference in a matter of a couple weeks, and collecting a hit in every game of the ALDS and the ALCS except Game 2 against the A's. So he's been making a difference, and he's really one of the main reasons why they've been this good. The late inning heroics by Correa is really the difference for this one, and it was unfortunate it went the way it did with the Rays, but he really got all of that ball and he let it fly. I do give G-Man Choi a lot of credit for hitting his home run, and boy, did that thing get up and get out. I mean, he really tattooed that ball. Astros had a big-time performance from the bullpen as they threw 5 rookies in relief in 7 innings over a stretch of 7 innings, and they shut down the Rays. And they didn't even have to use Framber Valdez so they can save him for an extra game or inning. And let me tell you what, it was essential that those rookies stepped up in that game, because getting into Game 6, Valdez was incredible for the Astros. I mean, he was really the difference maker, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. But this is a pivotal this was a pivotal Game 6 coming up here, and by the time this comes out, we will know what is happening in the series, whether the Rays get it done or the Astros do the unthinkable, forcing a Game 7, which, as we now know, they do force a Game 7. So some of my top performers from Game 5, Michael Brantley, 1 for 4 with 2 RBIs. George Springer, 1 for 4 with 1 RBI, 1 homer. And then G-Man Choi going a perfect 2 for 2 from the plate, 1 RBI and 1 homer. So, again, not as many top performers, but still some guys doing some really nice jobs in the lineup and getting things done when they needed to. And now moving into Game 6. And this is really where, if you're a Rays fan, I'm thinking, hey, They let them back in with 2 wins. We've got to capitalize on this, because if they force a Game 7, it's going to be, we're going to be backed into a corner that we do not want to be backed into. So getting into the game, it was scoreless after the first inning, and then Tampa Bay actually struck first, scoring the first run of the game in the bottom of the second, and then it was scoreless again in the third and the fourth. And Houston was able to score in the top of the fifth. And this is right here, this is a perfect example of what I mean by a team that is able to score in bunches and really pack in that offense in just 1/2 inning and really change the entire trajectory of the game. And that was the top of the fifth for the Houston Astros. They scored 4 runs. They followed it up with 1 more run in the 6th inning. And in the 7th inning, they followed it up with 2 more runs. So that went from, 1-0 to 7-1 in a matter of innings. Tampa Bay did tack on 1 run in the bottom of the 7th and then 2 in the bottom of the 8th, but it was not enough. Houston's offense was just too much for them, and Houston ultimately won 7-4 to force a Game 7. And again, the Astros, they're staying alive, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but they are now just 1 game away from the World Series. And I really didn't think we would get to this point in the season at all. It was another offensive outpouring that came from 1 inning, the 5th inning, and that has been the constant theme for the Astros. All it takes is 1/2 inning for them to build a little bit of separation, and that is all they need. I think going into the Game 7 matchup, the Rays can't allow the Astros to strike first. They cannot allow the Astros to get on the board first, because if you're the Rays and you've already allowed them back in, and if you let them score first, you're really, really going to be fighting an uphill battle there, because this Houston team, they're unforgiving. I mean, it's kind of similar, and I'll get into the second segment, it's kind of similar to how the Dodgers are over in the NLCS. If you give them any sort of wiggle room, they're going to capitalize on that. That's just the type of team they are. And this Houston team, although many people, including myself, were big-time doubters of them this year, and it showed. Their offense was clearly not the same offense they had the year before. A lot of their players were not playing the way that they've been playing in previous years. So they had a lot to prove, and they're doing that. And I think that's the scariest thing, is when you have a team that has a lot to prove, that is when they're the most dangerous. And it's clear that this Astros team has a lot to prove. And, even though the Rays held on to a 1-run lead for a few innings, and they did get some, strong production from Snell, it did not do enough. That 5th inning was the difference in this one, and now the Astros are the second team ever in baseball history to go down 3-0 in the ALCS and then go on to force a Game 7. They're actually the 39th team to ever go down 3-0 in the ALCS. So 2 for 39. That is a very improbable, statistic right there, but it is possible, as we know, the other one being the Boston Red Sox in 2004. But the fact that this Astros team could do the unthinkable, going into the World Series, whomever is coming out of the NLCS, I would be very afraid, because this Houston team is starting to really, really pick up steam. Framber Valdez, like I mentioned earlier, was sensational, and I mean sensational for the Astros, going 6 really strong innings, and he's been giving them everything and more from the mound. He's honestly been their most important player, I think. Yes, Springer and Altuve and Correa have all been heroes, and they've been doing very, very well, but it's really been Valdez who's made the difference. He's been kind of that X factor in the pitching where, okay, you obviously have McCullers, who's a pretty solid starter. You've got Greinke, who's a very good starter. So who's that third starter? When Verlander went down, they don't have Cole anymore, so their starting rotation is not the same that it was from last year. And having Valdez step up the way he's been stepping up, that is a crucial thing to have for this team. This Game 7 is going to be a great matchup, and I know that I'm going to be locked in for this one to see who will go to the World Series. It's going to be a fun one, and I am very excited for 4:30 today on Saturday, October 17th, because that game is going to be a really good one. So my top performers from Game 6, Jose Altuve, 2 for 3 with 1 RBI. Michael Brantley, 2 for 4 with 1 RBI. He actually extends his hit streak to 10 games. He's been on an absolute tear recently. He's been playing really, really well, and I know that I had mentioned him earlier on in a couple episodes where I'd said, hey, he might be able to be an MVP candidate, and this was, months ago. But that kind of, fizzled out very quickly, and then he sort of went through a little bit of slump. Then he came back up. He's been a very roller coaster season for Brantley, I feel. But in the playoffs recently, he's been playing great. Carlos Correa, he was 3 for 5 with 1 RBI. Kyle Tucker was 1 for 3 with 2 RBIs, and then Manuel Margot was 2 for 4 with 3 RBIs. So a lot more offensive production here in Game 6, but still not enough for the Rays as they weren't able to capitalize on really trying to take advantage of that, 3-2 series lead. Now it's 3-3, and it's anybody's ball game. It really is, and I think that's what's the frightening thing is that this could swing either way. And you can tell definitely the Rays' momentum has been completely taken from them by the Houston Astros. So that'll do it for us in this first segment, but stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I'm going to give my breakdown of the most recent NLCS games and mention some of the top players in the last 3 games of the National League playoffs. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I got right into a breakdown of games 4 through 6 in the ALCS and what all has been going on in the American League and with the Rays and the Astros. And let me tell you what, things are starting to get really, really interesting as they have now forced themselves into a Game 7 situation. Be sure to stay here with us on the GSMC Baseball Podcast for the last few minutes of the show as I'll get into my greatest World Series comebacks and what went on in those matchups and who came back from both singular games but also the entire series. So jumping into the NLCS recap, and let me tell you what, the Dodgers did everything and more in responding after the first 2 games, falling down to the Braves. And I'm going to get into it right now. So jumping into it, the Dodgers struck first in Game 3, and they really struck first, scoring 11 runs in the first inning. Yes, 11 runs in the top first inning. And things, you could tell that they were really, they were not going to allow themselves to go down 3-0 in this game at all. Max Muncy with a huge grand slam in the inning. They had, I think, 5 homers as a team over the entire game. They had 16 hits as a whole. So again, their offensive production was by far clear-cut, way better than Atlanta was in the game. So LA put up 11 runs in the first inning. They put up 1 run in the top of the second, and then 3 in the top of the third. So they're scoring all 15 runs before Atlanta even scored their first run. And they scored their first run in the bottom of the third. And then it was scoreless in the 4th inning, the 5th inning, 6th, 7th, and 8th inning before Atlanta was able to tack on 2 more runs in the bottom of the 9th. And I think they tried to do everything they could in that last inning, but that's just such a hard deficit to come back from, right? I think the biggest deficit that I have personally ever, in person witnessed was I saw a Phillies game many, many years ago with my parents, actually against the Dodgers, I think. And the Phillies were down, I think, 9-2 going into, the bottom of the 8th inning. They scored 5 runs or something like that, and then they held L.A. to, no runs in the top of the 9th. And then going to the bottom of the 9th, they actually scored, 3 more runs, and they wound up running 10-9 or something. But again, this is a totally different situation in terms of, the deficit and the difference and, how many runs were scored versus, 9 runs and 15 runs. That's still 6-run difference. That's a big difference. But getting into Game 3, talk about a runaway. This game was over before it even got started. You had a feeling going into this, I felt that you knew the Dodgers just weren't going to allow a 3-0 deficit. If they were, then they would be clearly giving up. But after that 11-run inning, yes, 11 runs. I can't reiterate that enough because that is just such an incredible thing. 11 runs in the first inning. Good luck trying to come back from that. They actually became the first team to ever score 11 runs in any inning of a postseason. They broke the record of 10, which had been achieved only 4 times in history. So really doing something that has only been done 5 times in total. That's a pretty hard feat to conquer. This was also the first time the Dodgers had scored at least 11 runs in any inning of any game since 1954 when the Brooklyn Dodgers scored 13 win against the Reds. So again, some fun fact, history right there also. But LA responded very well, and the pitching was great with Urias throwing a solid 5 innings in the absolutely crushing victory over the Braves. And I remember mentioning that, on Tuesday's episode, Urias is going to have to really, be the difference maker, right? On Saturday's episode, he's really going to have to be the difference maker. And he was, because their pitching just was not, sufficient in the first 2 games. And having Kershaw get scratched from that Game 2 start, that was not really, a great thing in their favor, obviously, having to go with the rookie Gonsolin. But other than that, Walker Buehler, he pitched all right in the first game, but you could tell Atlanta was jumping out all over him in the first couple innings. Urias really stepped up and really was the difference maker for them, and that was, I think, part of the reason why they were able to feel so comfortable. Now, I will say, after that huge 11-run inning, he did have in the bottom of first, or maybe it was the bottom second, one of the two, he actually had the bases loaded with 1 out or 2 outs, or maybe even no outs. I can't remember exactly which it was, but he was able to get out of that jam, and really, even if they had scored all 4 of those runs, it probably would not have made a huge difference. But, it could have maybe made a difference further down the game. But he was really efficient in getting out of these innings. He threw 5 solid innings, and that is what you need out of these starters. And this is the problem with Atlanta. After the dominating performances from Fried and Anderson, Kyle Wright comes in and gives up 7 earned runs and leaves the game with a 94.50 ERA. I saw this and I thought that it was completely incorrect. A 94.5 ERA. That is incredible. I feel really bad for Kyle Wright. He got shelled in that first inning, and having an ERA that's almost at 100, that is astronomical. But it wasn't, he just completely got tossed around. And we see the drastic drop in production and just ability in the starting pitching after Anderson and after Fried, and that is the problem. You go from Fried, Anderson, and then all of a sudden you've got a guy that's given up almost 100, earned runs an inning on average, and again, that is a little bit of, kind of, I don't want to say it's a misnomer, but it kind of is. That's just one game, and that's, very unrealistic to have on a consistent basis, because you probably want to have a job in the MLB if you had an ERA like that. But still, the drop-off in pitching production is way down after Fried and Anderson. So, but I will get into it in game 4. A little bit different of a situation, because they did actually get some really good pitching from a rookie who has not seen a whole lot of action this year, but I'll get into that in a minute. But, it was just really unfortunate to see that kind of unfold, but, they really have to rely on either, other guys in the rotation, and that's the Braves, which seems to not have worked in Game 3, or hope that Fried and Anderson can go on short rest some games, which I'm sure if it came down to it, they could. But, Atlanta's going to have to really try and figure out this pitching, because it's been really great this entire playoffs. It's been phenomenal the entire postseason. But when it matters most, you cannot have little, blips like that and little slip-ups like that when you have your starting pitcher give up 7 earned runs, not even getting out in the first inning. Now, my top performers from Game 3, Corey Seager was 3 for 4 with 3 RBIs. Max Muncy was 2 for 4 with 4 RBIs. He had a grand slam in that first inning. Jock Peterson, 4 for 6 with 3 RBIs. Cody Bellinger was 2 for 4 with 2 RBIs. And then Will Smith was 1 for 6 with 2 RBIs. So a lot of offensive power in this Dodgers lineup, and that is what's scary. You just read through those numbers and you read through those stat lines, and you say, wow, that's talk about modern day Murder's Row, trying to get through all of those guys. That's a tough lineup to get through. So getting into Game 4, and now this was a complete bounce back win by Atlanta. They actually came back and they did exactly what the LA Dodgers did to them in Game 3. So in the game, it was scoreless through the first 2 innings, and then the Dodgers tacked on another run, the first run of the inning. So in the first 3 innings, you're thinking, okay, well, the Dodgers are going to be picking it back up where they left off from the night before. So it's 1-0 going into the 4th, and then Atlanta scored 1 run in the bottom of the 4th. It was scoreless in the 5th inning, and then Atlanta's 6-run 6th inning was really what blew the doors wide open. It was 7-1 after that, and the Dodgers, they did make a little bit of noise. They did score a run in the top of the 7th. They were in striking distance. They were actually had 2 men on, 3 men on multiple times throughout the inning, and they just could not come up with anything. So it's still 7-2 going into the bottom of the 7th, and then the Braves actually tacked on another run to make it 8-2, and then going into the bottom 8th, the Atlanta Braves put on 2 more insurance runs to make it 10-2, and they ultimately won against the Dodgers 10-2. They had 14 hits as a team in this game, and let me tell you what, it was a completely different Braves team. Completely different. A complete flip. And it was funny. I stayed up to watch the post-game show on FS1, and all of the panelists, and the host, which I can't remember his name, I'm blanking on his name, but he's very prominent in baseball analytics and stuff. And Frank Thomas, David Ortiz, and Alex Rodriguez, they all picked the Dodgers to win this game. Very similar scores that they had, too. 7-3, 6-3, 7-4, 5-3, very similar, kind of just a 2-run, 3-run difference. And boy, did the Braves silence those predictions, and I mean badly. The Braves seemed to just pile on the offense against the Dodgers. It did take a few innings to get their bats going, but once they started making contact, it was just like a snowball effect. And 6 inning, a 6 runs, bottom 6 is right where, things definitely blew wide open. Marcell Ozuna continues to dominate, and I don't think people give him the credit. Maybe they do, and I'm just not listening or I'm not hearing it. But I think that he's arguably been one of the best hitters in all of baseball this year. I really genuinely believe that. He has been a huge, huge, huge factor on this team. He's probably been one of the most important players in any team in baseball, without question. I mean, having him on this team, I don't think it's coincidental that this is the first year since 2001 that they've gone this far in the playoffs, and this is the first year that he's been on the team. That is the added offense that they needed. They needed another power hitter alongside Freddie Freeman, and that is who they found, Ozuna, and he continues to dominate. And it's a shock to me how, everyone mentions Freeman immediately, and I do get it because he's been very good without question, but they seem to forget Ozuna, and I'm sure it's because they just forgot he's on the team, but his numbers are unforgettable, and he kept that trend going on in, the Game 5. He put up he was 4 for 5 on the evening, with 2 of those hits being homers. The sensational pitching and, quite frankly, needed pitching from Bryce Wilson was also very, very important. He only pitched 15 2/3 innings all year long, and this was his first career start in the playoffs in his career. His pitching definitely was a game changer, and especially coming off an absolute annihilation, a solid pitching outing is what they needed because this lineup is dangerous. And I love the back and forth of these 2 games. And one game, a team scores 15 runs, while the next game the other team scores 10 runs. And it's this back and forth that I love watching, and how one team responds and then the other one responds right back. And it's a great back and forth. It's kind of a slugfest, and this is what I thought that the Padres and Dodgers series was going to be like, but not so much. But it's starting to be the Braves and Dodgers that are really, kind of making things interesting for sure. And, in Game 4, things definitely did pick up for the Braves. I mean, no question. And they really bounced back from that Game 3 loss because, I mean, that is going out of that game, I'm sure you're up 2-1, you just gave up 15 runs, and you've got a game the next day, and you've got a rookie going on the mound. You as the Braves have to say, okay, we're going to have to really step up the hitting because if not, the pitching might not be there. We're already, we're allowing them back into the series a little bit. It's 2-1, and we know who we're playing with. We know who we're playing against, and we know what team we're going up against. And this team is a formidable opponent. This is the Dodgers. They've been to the World Series, 2 of the last 3 years. They've been to the NLCS 3 of the last 4 years or whatever it's been. They have been a very good team in recent memory, and as a result, we cannot forget who we're going up against. So if you're the Braves, you definitely have to make sure that going into Game 6 today, on Saturday, October 17th, that this is a totally, totally, totally different outcome. Because if not, and forcing a Game 7, I mean, that is the last thing that you want. Forcing a Game, Game 7, that's the last thing you want. You do not want to go into Game 7 with the Dodgers because similar to the Rays in the ALCS, they're probably really, backed into a corner, kind of afraid, oh my gosh, we've allowed them back in. It's Game 7 and it's do or die. So getting into Game 5, though, in a little bit, I'll mention that briefly here in a second, but getting my top performers from Game 4, Ronald Acuna, 2 for 4 from the plate. Freddie Freeman was 2 for 5 with 2 RBIs. Marcell Ozuna, 4 for 5 with 4 RBIs and 2 homers. Ozzie Albies was 2 for 4. Justin Turner was 2 for 4. And Edwin Rios was 1 for 3 with 2 RBIs. He actually hit a homer on the evening as well. So, solid production from the Dodgers. Not enough to get a win, obviously, but unbelievable production from the plate for the Braves. So getting into Game 5, and this was, again, another really good, kind of a closer one, if you will, not as big of a blowout. Getting into it, Atlanta scoring the first run of the game in the bottom first, and then putting on another run in the bottom second. Scoreless in the third inning, and then the top of the fourth inning, LA started their scoring. It was 2-1 after that inning. Going into the fifth inning, it was scoreless, and then going into the third inning, still Atlanta up 2-1 going into that third inning, and that is where the Dodgers put up back-to-back 3-run spots in the top of the 6th inning and top of the 7th inning to then take the lead 7-2. Atlanta was only able to put on one more run in the bottom of the 8th to make it 7-3, and they ultimately lost to the Dodgers 7-3 to make it now 3-2 in the series, still in favor of Atlanta. But things are starting to look really scary for the Braves. They have now allowed the Dodgers back into this one, and this is not a good sign because I could see this Dodgers team not being forgiving and allowing the Braves to take Game 6 with ease. And they, very similar to how the Dodgers are. How the Astros are. Both very, very similar how Dodgers and Astros are kind of being allowed back into these respective series against two teams that do not really know how to react and really how to compose themselves, I think, and to kind of conduct themselves in the point of the series that they're in right now, this far along in the playoffs. When you're in the championship series, this one series away from being in the World Series, completely different from, how they've, in recent years where they've wound up in the playoffs. I mean, with the Rays, they haven't been this far since 2008, 2009, and same thing with, the Braves, they haven't been this far since 2001, whereas the Dodgers and the Astros clearly recently have been in this position many, many times in the last couple years, and it's starting to show. They know and they have the experience how to battle back in these situations and really how to compose themselves this far along in the playoffs. But, Corey Seager continues to stay hot for the Dodgers. He hasn't missed a beat, another big home run. He's been absolutely lights out all year, and he's really coming through for them in the last few games. Atlanta is able to get out to a quick start, but it's their stamina. They seem to run out of steam as the game goes on, and that is what this Dodgers team is so good at, is they can produce offensively from any point of the lineup at any point of the game, and we can see a bulk of their runs being scored after the 5th inning, 3 in the 6th and 3 in the 7th. So really saving themselves for later on in the game and really still able to get those bats going at any point of the game. That's what makes them dangerous. You never know when they're going to strike. So clearly they can outlast their opponents, and with how the back end of the pitching for the Braves hasn't been the strongest, the Dodgers may have missed an opportunity in Game 4 to try and rough up Bryce Wilson a little bit, who is a rookie and not nearly as experienced, but they made up for it in Game 5. A.J. Minter was a savior for the Braves pitching-wise. 7 Ks in the 3 innings he worked for them, but it was guys like Jacob Webb who came in and gave up 3 earned runs, and Will Smith also gave up 2 runs. Actually, fun fact, Will Smith gave up a home run to Will Smith. Little, kind of Will Smith inception there. So the pitching is starting to wear down at the absolute wrong time. Hopefully, if Fried can get back on the mound for the Braves, they can try and close out this series and make it to the World Series. But this Dodgers team, they won't back down, and I see the same hunger the Astros have that the Dodgers also have. So they are going to be relentless and won't allow anything easy offensively or defensively. And let me tell you what, if there is a Dodgers-Astros World Series, that is going to be one of the most highly anticipated World Series, I think, in the last 10 years. Mainly because of all of the history that has gone on the last 3 years with not only those teams, but everything that came out that the Astros did and how the Dodgers were very outspoken about that. It's going to be an interesting first game in that World Series if it is Dodgers-Astros. So we'll see how these two series kind of play out. Again, Game 7 playing today as of recording on October 17th, and then the same thing with Game 6 for the Atlanta Braves and the LA Dodgers. Game 6 is also on Saturday. So when this comes out on Tuesday, we'll all know most likely who is going to be in the World Series. So my top performers for Game 5, Travis Darnell for the Braves. Again, he's continued to play very well from the plate, 1 for 3 with 2 RBIs. Freddie Freeman was 2 for 4. Corey Seager was 2 for 4 with 3 RBIs. Mookie Betts was 2 for 4 with 1 RBI. And Will Smith was 1 for 4 with 3 RBIs and a homer. That is, again, right there, having your catcher step up and be kind of another added factor in your hitting, something that not a whole lot of teams have, and having a really good hitting catcher, and the Dodgers have that right there. Will Smith has been a really, really good piece for them. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial break, I'll share my biggest shocks so far in the playoffs and what have been some complete mind-blowers during these different rounds of the postseason. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and we just wrapped up discussing the last few games in the NLCS as things have really been interesting in that matchup with a couple big run outings by the Dodgers and the Braves. But I want to now stick with that same theme of the playoffs, but mention some of the most shocking and surprising things in these playoffs that I have made note of, and some things that have really stuck out to me that I did not expect at all. So the first thing that I was really shocked by, and I'm still very puzzled by, is the Astros going to the ALCS. Now, the Astros in the ALCS is probably one of the most shocking things in the playoffs with how poor of a season they had, and the fact that they came into the playoffs with a poor 29-31 record from the regular season. They were one of two teams that came into the playoffs with a losing record, and they're the only one that is still surviving today. Finishing in the bottom half of team hitting in the regular season, the Astros have been in new form in the playoffs, being one of the top three hitting teams in the playoffs all postseason long. They've done a nice job at the plate between George Springer, Carlos Correa. Balls have been absolutely flying out of the park, but similar with Jose Altuve and Michael Brantley, who's currently on a 10-game hitting streak. I mean, they've been incredible. And Altuve, who has absolutely shot his batting average from .219 in the regular season all the way up to .341 in the postseason. And he also set the Astros record for the most home runs in postseason history for Houston in the entire franchise history. So again, another incredible monumental feat for Jose Altuve. The pitching out of the bullpen has been big, and with Framber Valdez really stepping up as their kind of dominant 2-3 option for the Astros with Greinke and McCullers. So I mean, I guess you'd probably put McCullers at 2, but Valdez has been great starting for them as that, further down the rotation pitcher, and he's arguably made a case for being, a really top 2 kind of rotation guy in this postseason. I mean, in some regards, you could make an argument he has pitched a little bit better than McCullers. I know that McCullers has come in and has, had some very dominant starting outings. He had an 11K start a couple games ago, so he's definitely, really has been a really big piece in this, Astros team in this bullpen and this starting rotation. But Framber Valdez has been unbelievable the entire way. He's been the most consistent pitcher, I would say, pretty much in the remaining teams in the playoffs right now. I mean, he's been the most consistent out of those 4 teams, no question. As they approached the postseason, they did start playing moderately better, but I still didn't have the hope that, they'd make the playoffs and they were able to sneak in, mainly because of a really poor division, which was led by the A's. But with the A's having an early exit in the playoffs, it seems the Astros are the kings of the AL West, and the Astros actually beat the A's in the playoffs. So again, really kind of reiterating that point that they might be the best of the AL West. They make it all the way to the round right before the World Series, and to me that is a huge shock because I didn't think that they would make it out of the first round, let alone even into the playoffs. They were able to edge out the Twins in the wild card, beat the A's, and then make it to the ALCS. It's their 4th straight ALCS, so this year definitely seems to be, a redemption year for Houston because of all the offseason things with the cheating scandal from last year. They had to go into this year knowing not only that, they couldn't do that, but that they were going to have to really prove themselves, and really prove everyone wrong that they can still win even without cheating. So that has been one of the biggest shocks for me in all of baseball right now is the Astros, and they're still, again, I'm recording this on October 17th, so when this comes out on Tuesday, who knows if that's going to be, still a truthful statement if the Astros are still alive. But as of right now, and really just looking back at this playoffs, the Astros making it to the ALCS, let alone forcing a Game 7, is incredibly shocking. So the next one, again, another team that I did not expect to make it this far, and I don't think many people did either. The Braves, continuing to roll on. And honestly, if you were to tell me 6 months ago or so that the Braves would be this deep in the playoffs, I would probably say that you are crazy, mainly off of the fact that they seem to go off during the season. During the regular season is when they really go off and they really play very well, and then fizzle out once the playoffs roll around. But they won their first playoff series since 2001 this year, so once that happened, things seemed to, it seemed like anything was really possible this year. And again, that's kind of been the theme with 2020, anything seems to be possible. And what has been the glaring difference from, for them this postseason as opposed to the regular season is their pitching, which has floated around the top 3 amongst the teams in the playoffs this year. And with Fried, impressing as always, helping the Braves move to actually 13-1 when he starts this year after their last win with him as a starter. It's really been also Ian Anderson that has made the biggest difference, I think. And that's just the pitching. I haven't even gotten into the hitting yet because their hitting has been unbelievable. And I think that's been the massive separating factor for them. And although their pitching was not great in the regular season, and it has boosted a little bit and has bolstered them a little bit as a team, I still think that the separating, the separating factor and kind of the common denominator in all of this is their hitting. And Anderson, he's yet to give up a run in the playoffs. He's got 22 Ks over the playoffs as well, and he's been efficient too. Compiling 8+ Ks in 2 of his last 3 starts, and he didn't go further than 6 innings in those games. So really moving through the innings at a great pace. One of the games he had 9 strikeouts in 5 2/3 and 8 Ks in 6 innings, something like that. And those were his first 2 starts in the playoffs. So he's really kind of set the tone for, I think, everybody else in that rotation. Max Fried and Anderson, they're kind of setting the bar very high for everyone else on that rotation and in that staff. The hitting, though, wow, has it been on a tear. Especially with Ozuna and how well he's been hitting, coming off a Thursday Game 3 matchup where he went 4 for 5 from the plate, belted 2 homers. The guy has serious power. That's Game 4. My bad. Game 4 matchup between, the Braves and the Dodgers. He went 4 for 5 from the plate, belted 2 homers. The guy's got, he's got incredible pop in his bat. And it's been easily the best season he's had in his career. And it goes along with the theme of how Atlanta has been way better this year than they've been in a while, especially in the playoffs. Making a World Series would be an extraordinary accomplishment for this team, especially with everything that has gone on this year with the pandemic and how they've been able to power through and make it this far. But let's not forget their young stars have stepped up big too. Ozzy Albies and Ronald Acuna have been playing like they've been this far in the playoffs before, that they've been in this spot before, and they've never been here before. Albies is batting .324 in the playoffs, while Acuna is only hitting .257, but he's had some huge homers and some really big at-bats this postseason. And Albies, he's really stepped up. And Swanson too, Dansby Swanson's been another guy that's really stepped up. And how could I forget their catcher, Travis d'Arnaud, who set the record for the most RBIs in an NLDS in a division series by a catcher in playoff history. 7 RBIs in the NLDS alone. He went off in that second round, and let me tell you what, he is really, again, another big X factor for them. Not only Ian Anderson, but also Travis d'Arnaud. He's been kind of that added piece that they've really been looking for and really been searching for. This team has a ton of firepower, and by dismantling the Braves after they had 15 runs scored on them the night before by LA in Game 3, this Atlanta team is here to stay. And honestly, if they don't win it all this year, I think that they are, just setting themselves up for the future, and I think that this won't be the last time we see the Braves this deep in the playoffs. Again, really showed that they were able to bounce back, and they were able to, kind of change the tide a little bit from going from Game 3 to Game 4, where they gave up 15 runs in Game 3, and then they were able to score 10 runs in Game 4. So if you're able to bounce back like that, especially against a team like the Dodgers, that's very, very, very incredible to do. So again, another shock. The Braves are still alive, but another real big surprise for me was the Marlins actually winning a series. And this is a big shock to me, mostly because I don't think this team would have made the playoffs if it were a full normal season, honestly. Mainly because they really don't have the firepower to go deep into the season, or really the playoffs to have strong performances either. Miami does have some solid pieces, with Jesus Aguilar and Miguel Rojas really proving to be their offensive anchors this season, in addition to Brian Anderson and Corey Dickerson. But Aguilar, Anderson, and Dickerson all batted under .220 during the playoffs, and they got lucky with the matchup they had in the first round in the wild card. The Cubs were not a great offensive team, and they really rode great pitching, I think, for most of the year, with Yu Darvish having a Cy Young caliber year. But hitting-wise, Contreras was poor, Baez, Happ, Rizzo, they all had poor years for their standards, and it showed in the playoffs, as their offense couldn't get anything to go at all, and the Marlins just barely eked by them. They won the deciding game 2-0, and it was off of just a 2-run homer. That was literally the difference in the game, was a 2-run home run. But their pitching was pretty steady, and the main reason for that was Sixto Sanchez. What a bright young star. he barely played in the minor leagues. I think he only played in like half of a season in single A, and then he gets called up to the pros, and he's been awesome for them. But this team winning the wild card did, cause a little stir in the baseball community, because the last 2 times that they had won the wild card series when they had made the playoffs, they went on to win the World Series. But this year, clearly not the same kind of scenario and the same outcome, but nonetheless, still a big shock that they were able to get into the divisional round. I was very floored by that. And again, like I said, I honestly could see them not even making the playoffs if it had been a full 162-game season. I think that they were going to eventually probably peter out at some point or another. Not sure when, because we won't be able to ever know that, because there was only 60 games in the regular season. But next year when there's 162 again, we'll be able to probably gauge a little bit better, was this just kind of a fluke year for them because of this pandemic, or are they actually a pretty good team that could really elbow their way through the NL East and fight their way into a playoff spot? Next big shock for me was the complete change in numbers by Bellinger and Altuve. I mean, this one really jumps out to me because these two are 2 former MVPs in the last 4 to 5 years. They've both won an MVP in that span of time, with Bellinger being the reigning MVP actually in 2019. And their 2020 season was nothing short of disappointing. After batting over 300 in his MVP year, Bellinger came back with what seemed to be a huge slump from that year. As he hit only .239 in the regular season in 2020, he did knock in 30 runs, so had a good offensive production in terms of generating runs and scoring, but hitting-wise and getting on base, that was a struggle all regular season for him, where he had career lows in batting average, OBP, slugging, and OPS. So clearly a down year for him. But once he got in the playoffs, things started to really pick up for Bellinger, where he had at least a hit in each of the first 6 games in the playoffs this year. Now he has started to cool off a little bit, with his average going from .316 back on October 8th to .257 on October 15th. So in a week, a huge turnaround, but still much better than the numbers he had in the regular season, where he was actually ranked 99th in the MLB out of qualified hitters in batting average during the regular season. So still within the top 100, but just barely. Now, Altuve has not seen any sort of slump, and he actually hit worse than Bellinger did in the regular season, batting .219 in the regular season with a his OPS number, his OPS was a .629 OPS. His numbers have now inflated, from a 1.202 OPS to a 341 average in the postseason. So batting .219 in the regular season to now batting .341 in the postseason, and having a .629 OPS to a 1.202 OPS in the postseason. Those are ginormous jumps. I mean, you're doubling your OPS just about, and you're adding over 100 points in batting average in literally 3-4 weeks. And he's got a whopping 5 homers in the postseason and 10 RBIs. He recently also set the record for the most career playoff home runs in Astros franchise history. So he's even surpassed a big milestone, which is a big difference from the output he had in the regular season. But I will say the fielding seems to have taken a bit of a hit, no pun intended, in productivity, as he's had numerous throwing errors over at second, and a couple of them have been flat-out bad attempts at throwing to first. I mean, they literally look like he has completely forgotten how to field, but he's made up for it from the plate. So it's kind of, which Altuve are you going to get, the great fielder and the bad hitter, or the great hitter and the bad fielder? If he's able to keep both consistent, I mean, it's no mistake as to why he's been the MVP before, right? And again, we have to, probably count in whether or not he was knowing what pitches were coming for all those years and how long that was all going on with the cheating scandal. But again, he won the MVP no matter what, and, we have to give him his respect there. Bellinger has had some acrobatic plays in center field in the playoffs, with a huge home run robbing grab earlier in the postseason. So he, as one has started to flatten out the sharp curve they saw in batting average, with Bellinger going from, 316 and hitting to 257, the other stays hot from the plate, with Altuve really staying around that 340 the entire postseason. But then it's the opposite for the fielding, with Bellinger playing much better in the field than Altuve is, and really showing off kind of that range that Bellinger has and that ability in center field that he's got. Either way, it's a shock that they have been playing this much better in the playoffs, but Altuve seems to really be the one who had the most dramatic improvement from one point of the season to the other, and you can tell he is trying to prove to people he can play the game legitimately. But after, the regular season he had, a lot of people questioned that and really wondered if all of, his success was based off of sign stealing, or if it was actually him playing very, very well. So really big shock that both Altuve and Bellinger have stepped up to the plate in this playoffs and have really played much better than the regular season. I did not see that coming, but I remember saying, a couple episodes ago that those two players would be players that could turn their season around if they had really good playoffs, and they've done just that. They really have. Now, the next thing that has really come as a shock is the number of records that have been set or broken this playoffs. I mean, this has been a real surprise because I feel like every 2 days I get a notification or two on my phone about the different records that have been set or things that have occurred that, haven't happened in a while. Between the Twins setting the record for the longest longest losing streak in the playoffs in all major professional North American sports, to Josh Naylor becoming the first player in postseason history to collect at least a hit in each of his first 5 at-bats in the playoffs. There have been numerous records being broken. I know I mentioned Travis Darnell setting the record for, most RBIs by a catcher in a division series round with 7. I mean, there's been a number of records. I honestly think this is in part to the weird regular season there was. As we clearly saw, there were numerous teams that haven't been in the playoffs in the last 4 to 5 years actually make it this year, with the Reds, Padres, White Sox, and the Marlins all not making it within the last 4 or 5 years at least. So you knew going into it that there would be a few things that would get broke, a few records that would probably get broken, and probably some other things that would have come up anyways. And one of them, I think, that is incredible still to me is the Dodgers record they broke with the most runs scored in one inning in playoff history with 11. And that is a staggering number of runs to put up in just one inning. One inning. And to do that in the playoffs, that's even more impressive. I mean, let alone doing it in the regular season, but in the playoffs, that's even harder to do. The Astros also had a very unique record break the other night as well, where they became the first team to ever start and finish a game with a home run, where Springer hit a leadoff homer off the first pitch in Game 5, and then Correa hit a walk-off in the bottom of the ninth and was able to give the Astros their second win in the series. This was going to be a historic year no matter what with the surrounding circumstances, but without question, I don't think anyone saw the things that happened in these playoffs so far, and there were definitely not that many people who figured there would be this many records being broken in the playoffs, and one of those people is definitely me. I did not see this many records being broken, so I put that as a shock. I mean, there's been a lot of other shocks in the playoffs, but those have just been a couple that have really jumped out to me that I've really kind of made note of and said, hey, that doesn't really happen a whole lot in the playoffs. I mean, that hasn't happened in recent years, and, in recent memory, that definitely, has not occurred. And again, just the frequency in which we know and we hear about these records being broken this postseason is even more impressive. I mean, it's just, like I said, almost every couple days, I feel like I'm getting a notification about some record that's being broken. So a very surprising season, but a very, very, very shocking postseason for sure. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around, but stay right there. We'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I discuss the greatest World Series comebacks of all time, whether they were in a singular game or if it was a series that a team came back from. I'll be sure to highlight it and discuss it in our next segment. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the third segment, I discussed the biggest surprises in the playoffs so far and what has shocked me the most in the postseason. I want to now close out the episode ranking the greatest comebacks in World Series history, either a game or an entire series, whichever one. So I'll jump right into it, and coming in at number 5, and let me tell you what, I was reading through some of these comebacks on the internet, and I was very surprised. I mean, some of these had happened years ago. I'm talking 40, 50, 60 years ago that I was reading into, and I was very, very shocked by. I mean, a couple teams that were coming back from massive 3-1 deficits in series and being able to work their way back into the World Series, and again, not to mention, it's the biggest stage in baseball. It is the Fall Classic, and if you're down 3-1 or 3-0 in a World Series, good luck coming back. I mean, that is a hard feat to conquer. So I'm going to jump into it. coming in at number 5, the 2001 World Series Game 7. This might be one of the biggest upsets in World Series history, in my opinion, and it is definitely one of the greatest come-from-behind wins ever. As a new MLB team and an expansion team, the Diamondbacks found themselves in their first ever World Series, but they were going up against one of the best teams to ever play, and a team that was no stranger to being in this position in the New York Yankees. The Diamondbacks had an incredible year that year with their main star power coming from their pitching with Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling, combining for a total of 23 wins during that year. And I saw that number and I said, wow, 43 wins as two guys. A combined total between your two aces, 43 wins. That's on average, I'm not doing the math that quickly right now. 21, 22 wins each. That's unbelievable. They had won only their second division title in their franchise history that year, and they were brand new starting in 1998. So again, 3 years in and they're making their first ever World Series. That's a pretty quick ascension if you ask me. The Yankees, on the other hand, were coming off a World Series win from the year before against their city rivals, the New York Mets, and were no stranger to being in this position before. So they were a challenge it was a big challenge for the Diamondbacks. The Yankees had to really, scrap away at making it into the ALCS after going down 2-0 early to the A's before coming back to beat them. They went through the Mariners to get into the World Series, while the Diamondbacks won their NLCS matchup against the Cardinals in walk-off fashion, and then they went through the Braves to make it to the World Series. The series started off in favor of Arizona with them winning the first two games and winning one of the games in a big way by a final of 9-1. Now, after the attack of 9/11, the World Series again was on pause and eventually was resumed. And as we all know, that famous clip of President Bush coming out and throwing that incredible first pitch, it really, breathed some life into the stadium and the city of New York, really. The Yankees responded by taking Game 3 and making the series 2-1. The next two games would be extra inning wins by the Yankees. In Game 4, it would be a 10-inning win, and in Game 5, it would be a 12-inning win to allow the Yankees to take a 3-2 lead. So all of a sudden, they go down 2-0, but then they win the next 3 to regain the series lead. So a back-and-forth series, to say the least, for sure. Game 6 was all in favor of the Diamondbacks, with them winning in a commanding way, 15-2. Andy Pettitte was rocked, and Randy Johnson was absolutely lights out for the Diamondbacks, so that really set up Game 7 of the World Series. It was Schilling and Clemens going for Game 7. So two very strong pitchers who had vast reputations in the league and were known widely as some of the best pitchers in the league at the time. We all know how good Roger Clemens was. Again, all that stuff that came out about his steroid use and this, that, and the other. But nonetheless, Curt Schilling was unbelievable in his heyday for sure. The Yankees would take the lead 2-1 going into the top of the ninth inning, and Randy Johnson was able to sit down a power-hitting trio of the Yankees in Bernie Williams. So they did a really nice job of keeping Randy Johnson in. He went the distance, and he was able to limit the hitters of the Yankees, such as Bernie Williams, Jorge Posada, and Tino Martinez. So three very strong hitters, to say the least. Mariano Rivera was heading into the bottom of the ninth with a one-run lead, which most people would probably look at from a glance and say, all right, he can do this. And lo and behold, he was rocked in the inning. He wound up loading the bases, which set up Luis Gonzalez, who was actually third that year in the NL in homers with 57, and he saw a pitch on a 1-0 count that he liked, and he ripped it into the outfield to score the winning run. This is by far one of the best World Series comebacks because you involve the 9/11 attack and where our country was at the time. I'm sure it was something in our minds, but they were able to overcome this and make it an incredible series, and Arizona really did an unbelievable job fighting their way back after taking the initial lead and then ultimately winning in Game 7. They go up 2-0, then they go down 3-2, and then they wind up winning the next two to win the series. And as an expansion team, that's definitely one of the best World Series that I think in this modern era that we can talk about. And that might be a little bit of a hot take, but with just that back and forth of the series and trading shots the entire time, that's what makes it very entertaining and very competitive. So coming in at number 4, the 1979 World Series is another great World Series comeback. Unlike the first two World Series, this one was a come-from-behind win with the series as the Baltimore Orioles and the Pittsburgh Pirates were going head-to-head in the World Series that year. This was actually a very special year for the Pirates. I'll get into that in a minute, but overall, this was a solid series and probably an incredible come-from-behind victory. The Orioles had an over 100-win season with a total of 102 wins, and the two teams split the first two games in the series, with the Pirates winning Game 2 after dropping Game 1 in a low-scoring, in a one-run game, 5-4 to over the Orioles or against the Orioles. Baltimore responded right away in Game 3, winning in Game 3 and Game 4 before falling in Game 5 to the Pirates. So a big back-and-forth battle all series long between both teams. the Pirates bats really woke up, and they wound up taking games 5 and 6 from with the Pittsburgh defense really limiting the Orioles to only 1 run over the 2 games. So great. I mean, the essential hitting that they needed was able to just put them over the hump over the Orioles, and they limited the Orioles to only 1 run in those 2 games. That's some great defensive production. In the deciding Game 7, this is where things, and really where the tension was at its highest. But after the first 2 innings being scoreless, the Orioles were the first to score, while Pittsburgh was quiet offensively, but they picked things up later in the game, scoring 2 runs in the 6th and 2 in the 9th. In the series, a fun fact about the Pirates was they outscored the Orioles 21 of 32 runs in the final 4 innings. So, again, outscoring them by that much in the last 4 innings of each game, it's an impressive and an important stat to look at because as we can see, in their final game of the series, their offense was scoring much later in the game, and it really helped. I mean, it really was the difference maker, and the Pirates were able to conclude the improbable World Series comeback, and ultimately they won their 5th and last World Series to date. And again, from that point on, they have yet to win another World Series, and maybe the 2020s will be their time, or maybe the 2030s. Who knows? But again, that's coming at number 4. Now, coming in number 3, 1985 World Series, a little battle of the I-70 Highway. And this was called the Show Me series, I believe it was, or the Show Me Shutdown or Showdown, something like that. But they had a nickname for the series because it was the Royals and the Cardinals. They were taking each other on as homegrown cities and hometown cities, also staying local for the World Series, as the Royals were in Kansas City and the Cardinals were St. Louis, and the I-70 Highway connects the two cities and the 2 teams. Really, this would be an interesting World Series, as it was the first World Series where all of the games were played in the evening. So again, something that was very uncharacteristic that back then was playing the World Series during all games in the evening, and this was a first case scenario where all of the games were put in the nighttime, and I mean, that's a pretty incredible thing. That's a very monumental thing that still holds true today. We always have World Series games that are usually in the evening for the most part, not all the time, but for the most part. But that really that's not really that long ago. That's what's the other incredible thing is not that long ago they started to implement the evening kind of scenario and playing games in the evening time more. The World Series used to have no evening games through the entire series, but this year, that is where things started to change for sure. This was also the second World Series that was played on artificial turf for all games. So another incredible fact about the World Series, but this was a heavily favored Cardinals team going up against the Royals, and man, did it show. They were the heavy favorites. I mean, the Cardinals winning 3 of the first 4 World Series games in 1985, so the Royals found themselves in a little bit of a hole. Over the last 3 games of the series, the Royals would allow a combined 3 runs to the Cardinals, and you could tell they buckled down and they were ready to play after Game 4, and they made a storming comeback. The Royals wound up winning the Game 7 matchup 11-0 over St. Louis, which is pretty incredible to put that many numbers and that many runs on the board in a series-deciding matchup. The Royals were led that year by George Brett, the Hall of Fame third baseman that belted 30 homers and 112 RBIs, but having a 3-1 deficit is, again, a very hard thing to come back from, and the Royals were able to really lock in, and they clawed their way back into the series and eventually won and beat their crosstown rivals, and really cross-highway rivals, if you will. This would actually conclude an incredibly successful decade for the Royals, which featured 6 division titles and 2 pennants, as well as a World Series from 1976 to 1985, which many believe is one of the best decade-long runs in an expansion team's history. So, the Diamondbacks seem to must have taken a page out of the Royals' book because, they had a little bit, a much smaller run in that sense, and that, quick of an ascension for their expansion in regards to the Diamondbacks. But the Royals, they really are kind of the blueprint into how these expansion teams are able to rise up very quickly and establish themselves very quickly as a really good and legitimate team in baseball. So then moving into my next World Series comeback and greatest World Series comeback, and coming at number 2, it's got to be the 2011 World Series Game 6. If this doesn't describe persistence as a team, then I don't know what does, because this Cardinals team would not back down in the Game 6 matchup at all. The Cardinals and the Rangers were back and forth for most of the game, but it was the Rangers constantly being able to hold on to a lead during the game, with them commanding a 7-4 lead going into the bottom of the 8th inning. The Cardinals began to chip their way back into this one with a solo homer by Alan Craig in the 8th, and then in the 9th, that is when the legend of playoff hero David Freese was born. barn as he hit a game-tying home run in the ninth to force the game into extras. The Rangers, again, they were not done as the power-hitting outfielder Josh Hamilton stepped up to the plate in the top of the 10th inning and wound up crushing a 2-run homer to give the Rangers the lead, again, 9-7, going into the bottom of the 10th inning and really putting the pressure on the Cardinals to score. I mean, when you're going into the bottom half of an extra inning game and you just had that other team score in the top half, you're really putting the pressure on them and you're really backing them into a corner. The bottom of the 10th was an action-packed inning as Albert Pujols would get walked with 2 outs in the bottom of the 10th, and Lance Berkman made his way to the plate. Berkman roped a single into the outfield, giving the Cardinals a tied ball game. After that hit would score a run. That would then prompt the David Freese to step up to the dish and belt his infamous walk-off home run in the bottom of the 10th inning, where the man who tied it up and then won it was the hero in the game and the World Series that year. It was without a doubt one of the greatest comebacks in World Series history, and probably just in general. I mean, having that kind of comeback is an unbelievable thing to have, especially with 2 outs. It's bottom 10, you're down 2, and you've got 2 outs. And you're able to still muster something together and put it together an incredible comeback. I mean, that really was kind of the short-lived, peak of David Freese, if you will. I mean, he had like 2 or 3 good years, and then after that, he kind of was back to his normal self. But, I mean, if you want to call him a glorified utility player, you can, but I think that he was probably a little bit more than that. I think he was a very solid, long tenure baseball player, but again, I mean, that was really kind of the peak of his career. So the number 1 greatest comeback in World Series history is the 1968 World Series. This is an unbelievable comeback, mainly because of the scoring difference through the first 3 games, and really the game, games 3 and 4, I should actually say, of the finals between the Cardinals and the Tigers. Another series that would go out to a 3-1 lead by the Cardinals. The Tigers were actually outscored by a staggering 17-4 between games 3 and 4, and it was an atrocious offensive production that they were trying to put on. I mean, that is terrible. And again, you split the first 2 games, and then you go into the next 2 games trying to, I mean, that is a very pivotal point. When you split the first 2 games and you go into 3 and 4, those are make or break games, because somebody can either even it up, it can stay even, or somebody can take a 3-1 lead. And that is exactly what the Cardinals did. And you can tell that the offense was humming for the Cardinals, and the Tigers couldn't get anything to go. So you're really kind of down and out going into Game 5, but that's really kind of where things started to pick up for them. And at that point, again, if you're sitting there saying there is no way that they will come back after scoring only 4 runs in 2 very pivotal games, especially with the series tied after the first 2 games, you're really kind of, it's looking very bleak for you if you're a team like that. Now, Game 5 would go in favor of the Tigers to allow them to keep their chances alive and to cut the series matchup to 3-2. Now, in Game 6, the Tigers would pour the runs on the Cardinals and wind up winning that game to force it into a Game 7, 13-1. And again, going into the 7th and final game, that was really kind of where things, would eventually just fizzle out for the Cardinals, and they were not able to, put anything together. And the Tigers actually wound up taking that series in 7 games, wind up winning in a dramatic come-from-behind, fashion. And especially when you're down, 3-1, that's a pretty hard thing to do. That is a very, very hard thing to do. So again, that's my number 1 greatest comeback, mainly because of the deficit that they were down scoring-wise after games 3 and 4, and you're really kind of backed into a corner in Game 5, and they were able to completely change the momentum, and they wound up winning in 7 games and ultimately winning the 1968 World Series. So a lot of great World Series comebacks in the years, and I know that we're going to have probably a lot more great comeback series in coming years as well, and we've already seen a great comeback series with the Rays and the Astros, so we'll see how that one plays out, but I'm very excited for how this World Series is going to look in 2020. So that'll wrap it up for us here today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd greatly appreciate that. Thank you again for listening, and as always, have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.